Okay, I am back and I am here going to read about chapter 2, and this is on the marriage of Queen Mary and King George V. So it is a very interesting chapter. So hopefully you'll be able to enjoy it. I always enjoy reading about Queen Mary and George, because I do think they had a good marriage. It was an arranged marriage somewhat, but they were both so good with each other. And I just think it's very interesting. So I hope you'll appreciate it. The Betrothed, Prince Mary, The Domestic Harmony, Shotgun and Stamps. That's the title. Weak from typhoid and desolate with grief, Prince George found himself at the age of 26 in direct line of succession to the throne. It was a daunting role for which he himself felt ill-equipped by temperament and training. Certain changes in his daily life, however, helped to restore self-confidence. He was given quarters of his own part of St. James's Palace in London and the bachelor's cottage a few hundred yards from Sandringham House. He also acquired a small staff to organize his growing but far from onerous program of public engagements, and included his shipmate Charles Cust, who was an equerry. He was a candid friend and court jester who remained with him for almost 40 years. Finally, financially, he was free from care. In 1889, the Prince of Wales, after an exhaustive negotiations and parliamentary debate, he secured an annual grant of £36,000 from the Consolidated Fund to be divided among his children as he thought. On the death of Prince Eddie, the greater part of this sum devolved on Prince George. It proved more than enough to support his sober tastes. In the summer of 1892, the Queen ensured that her grandson would enjoy the same status as his late brother by creating him a duke. She conferred the dignity with reluctance, repeating her belief that as a prince or no one else can be, or as a duke any nobleman can be, and many are. She disliked the proposed title Duke of York, the last holder of which, her uncle, had been disgraced as commander-in-chief of the army by his mistress's illicit sale of commissions. It was for that reason that the Queen made her own second son not Duke of York, but Duke of Edinburgh. For her grandson, she would have preferred the title Duke of London, but that did not impress the point. Prince George was introduced to the House of Lords by his new title on June 1892. "Fancy my Georgie boy doing that," the Princess of Wales wrote playfully to him, "and now being a grand old Duke of York." The Queen was no more successful in another matter of nomenclature by calling her eldest son Albert Edward and prompting him to have his own heir christened Albert Victor. Although known in the family as Eddie, she apparently ensured that the next two British sovereigns at least would bear her husband's name. But now that Albert Victor was no more, she wished George to use his own last and hit here, too, concealed name of Albert. He respectfully refused. After the fashion of a royal duke whose signature is not his title but his chosen Christian name, he continued to sign George, and it was as King George V that he had himself proclaimed on ascending the throne in 1910. Like his father before him and his second son after him, he well knew the importance of not being Albert. Yeah, those were big shoes to live up to, being Albert, the consort of Queen Victoria. So they didn't want to have that as their name. The new Duke of York had to resign himself to the virtual end of his career at sea. For a few weeks, however, he was allowed to command the cruiser, Melampus, named after the soothsayer and the physician of Argos, who understood the language of birds and beasts. Not such magic marked the fleet's summer exercises off the Irish coast. The captain, who remained on the bridge for 6 days and nights, wrote in his diary, "The flagship made any number of mistakes, and we all got on anyhow. I hope I shall not be in any other maneuvers. I hate the whole thing." It was followed by a no less disagreeable duty, his final but profitless struggle to master the German language in the house of a professor at Heidelberg. While in Germany, he represented the Queen at the golden wedding of the Grand Duke of Saxe-Weimar. The Prince of Wales, an incomparable master of haberdashery, warned his son to take out his whole German uniform with boots and all his German orders. This equipage the Duke had received in 1890 when given an honorary command of a Prussian regiment. It evoked a characteristic tirade from his mother, and so my Georgie boy, has become a real live, filthy, blue coated, pickle hob German soldier. Oh, she did not like that. Well, I never thought to have to live to see that. But never mind, as you say, it could not have been helped. It was your misfortune and not your fault. Furnished with a dukedom and an income, 2 houses, and a household, Prince George still lacked the ultimate requirement of his hereditary role. He had neither wife nor children. Within weeks of Prince Eddie's death, family and nation were determined that he should marry his brother's fiancée. It was Queen Victoria who, as always, reflected the common sense of her subjects. In the spring of 1892, she was at Hyrus, near Toulon, enjoying, if such a word may ever be used of that perennial tragedy, a Mediterranean holiday. She wrote cryptically to her grandson, "Have you seen May, and have you thought more about the possibility or found out what her feelings might be?" By chance, both the Wales and the Teck families had also sought to assuage their grief on the French Riviera. Prince George and his parents were at Cape Martin or Cap Martin. Princess May and her parents a few miles along the coast of Canis. Not until nearly a month after his arrival did he address this diffident letter to the princess. "Papa and I are coming over to the Canis towards the end of the week for a few days. So I hope I shall see you then. We hope one day you will give us a little dinner. We are going to stay at a quiet hotel. And don't say anything about it. The others will remain here. Goodbye, dear Miss May. Ever your very loving old cousin Georgie." So began Princess May's second courtship. Her parents, the Duke and the Duchess of Teck, having been so cruelly cheated of their daughter's happiness and of a dazzling alliance with the British crown, were enchanted. Impoverished and, in the eyes of other German royal houses, diminished by the taint of Morganic blood, they could scarcely have dared to hope for such a revival of good fortune. The attitude of the Prince and the Princess of Wales was more ambivalent. Naturally, they felt the utmost pity for the bereaved fiancé. "It's hard," the Prince wrote to the Queen, "that poor little May should virtually become a widow before she was even a wife." On what would have been her wedding day, they gave her a reverie of diamonds, their own intended present. together with the dressing case which Prince Eddie had ordered for his bride. If during the sad reunion they were reminded of how much they had lost both in the son and the daughter in law, they must also have recognized that Princess May would make a steady and amiable wife for their surviving son. Such speculation, however, was tempered by doubts, where May, to marry George, might not a cynical word assume that she had ever truly loved Eddie. For the Princess of Wales is particularly, the suggested betrothal presented an acutely painful dilemma. Having already lost one son by death, that most possessive of mothers would not readily allow the other to be parted from her by matrimony. She wrote to Prince George, "There is a bond of love between us, that of mother and child, which nobody can ever diminish or render less binding, and nobody can, or ever shall, come between me and my darling Georgie boy." In contrast to that devouring maternal affection, Prince George's own letters to Prince May were hesitant, almost dejected. One of them, he hoped it wouldn't bore you too much when you are stopped and throw it away. The reproachful shade of his dead brother seemed often to have hovered over his wooing. Gradually, his confidence returned. There were exchanges of little presents, family visits, and private assignations. On the 3rd of May, 1893, Prince George, the Duke of York, proposed to Princess May of Teck and was accepted. The nation rejoiced at what, in retrospect, seemed to have been the inevitable solution to both private grief and a dynastic need. Not without irony, the betrothal took place in the garden of Sheen Lodge in Richmond Park, the home of Princess Louise, the Duchess of Fife. It was to remove the eldest and the most withdrawn of Prince George's sisters from the direct line of succession to the throne that the Queen had encouraged her grandson's match. Neither of the young pair could immediately surmount a sense of restraint. Princess May wrote to her fiancé, "I am very sorry that I am still so shy with you. I tried to be so I tried to not be so the other day, but I failed. I was angry with myself. It is so stupid to be so stiff, and really there is nothing I would not tell you except that I love you more than anybody in the world, and this I cannot tell you myself, so I write to relieve my feelings." Prince George replied the same day, "Thank God we both understand each other, and I think it's really unnecessary for me to tell you how deep my love for you is, my darling. I feel it has grown stronger and stronger every time I see you, although I may appear shy and cold, but this worry and this busy time is most annoying, and when we do meet, it is only to talk business." The betrothed couple also had to endure an undercurrent of spiteful comments from those who lacked the vision and understanding of the old queen. Lady Geraldine Somerset, the lady-in-waiting to the Duchess of Cambridge, Princess May's maternal grandmother, noted unamiably in her diary, "It's clear that there is not even any pretense at love-making. May is radiant at her position and abundantly satisfied, but placid and cold as always. The Duke of York apparently nonchalant and very indifferent." Both were fortunately too preoccupied with the arrangements for the wedding to brood on malicious whispers. The present numbers was 1,500, and they were valued at £300,000. several million pounds in the currency of almost a century later. For Princess May, who was brought up frugally by the standards of other royal families, there was the delight of choosing a trousseau paid by a generous uncle and aunt, the Grand Duke and Grand Duchess of Mecklenburg-Strelitz. It included 40 outdoor suits, 50 ball gowns, and an innumerable bonnets, shoes, and gloves. Princess May was about to become the third lady in the land, exposed to relentless public gaze. The wedding took place on July the 6th, 1893, in the Chapel Royal, St. James's Palace. By some rare Arab ceremony, the Queen arrived not last of the royal family as protocol demands, but first. Unusually tolerant of the mistake, she enjoyed for once seeing the guests assemble. The Duke of York wore the uniform of a captain in the Royal Navy, a rank which he had been promoted to earlier that year. Princess May was in white silk with a train of silver and white brocade. Lady Geraldine Somerset alone resisted the charm of the scene. Instead of coming in the exquisite, ideal way the Princess of Wales did at her wedding with her eyes cast down, too prettily, May looked right and left and slightly bowed to her acquaintance, a great mistake. Nor did it turn out to be an entirely flawless celebration for the Queen. At the garden party in Marlborough House, the day before the ceremony, she acknowledged the presence of Mr. Gladstone with a stiff bow rather than with a handshake, which would have been more appropriately greeted. Her octogenarian prime minister, nevertheless, passed behind her, Mr. Disraeli, who had sat down uninvited in the royal preserve. "Does he perhaps think this is a public tent?" the Queen indignantly observed. Otherwise, all was sunshine as the newly married couple took leave of the Queen and drove through cheering crowds to catch the train to Sandringham. Princess May's early life was sometimes had been depicted as the Cinderella, a tale of rags to riches, with not one but two princesses as her prize, and ultimately what the Empress Frederick called the first position in Europe, one may say in the world. It's a fable which requires many qualifications. Her father was Francis, the Prince of Teck, the son of the Duke of Alexander of Württemberg. The Duke's descendants would eventually have succeeded to the throne of that small German kingdom had he not contracted a morganic marriage with Claudine, the Countess of Reddy, a Hungarian of ancient family. She lacked the immediate royal blood that alone would have made the alliance acceptable to a 19th century reigning house. The son of that marriage, Francis, had consoled with the style of Serene Highness and the title Prince of Teck, a subsidiary name of the royal house of Württemberg. A man of striking good looks but volatile temperament, he served in the Austrian army and took part in the Battle of Solferino. It was in Vienna that he caught the eye of his near contemporary, the Prince of Wales, who invited him to England as a possible suitor for the hand of Princess Mary Adelaide of Cambridge. The Princess Mary Adelaide, she was a daughter of Adolph, the Duke of Cambridge, the youngest son of King George III. She was thus a sister of George, the Duke of Cambridge, Commander-in-Chief of the British Army for almost 40 years, and a first cousin of Queen Victoria. But the pedantic standards of the German monarchies, Prince Francis's Teck was not of equal birth for such a match. The Queen took a more robust view of dynastic niceties. The queen said, "I have always thought it and do think it's very wrong and very absurd," she wrote, "that because his mother was not a princess, he is not to succeed in Württemberg." Prince Francis did, however, suffer from a more practical handicap. He had no money. If he was not the ideal suitor for the Royal Highness and the Prince of Great Britain and Ireland, she too displayed certain defects. In 1866, when the Prince of Teck arrived in England, she was 32, 4 years older than her prospective suitor, long resigned to be a jolly old maid. One reason for her prolonged spinsterhood was an excessive stoutness. Alas! Lord Clarendon wrote ungallantly in 1860, "No German princess will venture on so fast an undertaking." The Whig Foreign Secretary was proud of his wit and boasted he never told his best jokes to the royal family, since pretending to pinch his fingers in the door amused them more. The princess did little to curb her corpulence. She enjoyed life, not least of all a well-furnished table. Traveling by train to Sandringham with the Prince of Wales in the days before restaurant cars, she noted with relish a capital hot lunch of chicken and rice and beefsteaks and fried potatoes. A lady in waiting described her in middle age as very handsome, but rather a large purple plush pincushion. Yeah, um, Queen Mary's mother was pretty hefty in size, so. But I think she was a happy-go-lucky Duchess of Cambridge. Um, After a brief courtship, Prince Mary Adelaide was married to Prince Francis of Teck on 12 June 1866 in the Kew Church, near the home of the bride's mother. The Queen set her seal of approval on the match by allowing the couple to live in the same spacious apartments of Kensington Palace, where she herself had been born and spent her childhood. It was there that Princess May was born on 26 May 1867, 2 years after the Prince of Wales had given birth to Prince George. The infant's first name was originally to have been named Agnes, after her maternal great-grandmother and at her baptism. However, with the Queen as the godparent, she was christened Victoria Mary Augusta Louise Olga Pauline Claudine Agnes. Princess Mary Adelaide would refer to her as "my Mayflower," and it was as Princess May that she was everywhere known until her husband ascended the throne in 1910. She then assumed the more majestic style of Queen Mary. "A very fine child," the Queen wrote on the 22nd of June, 1867, "with quantities of hair, brushed up into a curl on the top of her head, a very pretty features and dark skin. In the following year, a dear, merry, healthy child, but not as handsome as she thought to be. Princess May never achieved beauty. She held herself with dignity that seemed to add inches to her medium height. And she had fine, observant blue eyes, but a firm jaw, full mouth, and turned-up nose that denied her the flawless radiances of the Princess of Wales." Brought up in Kensington Palace, the great-grandmother of King George III and goddaughter of Queen Victoria, she was never allowed to think of herself as anything but English. The first letter she wrote in French to her grandmother, the Duchess of Cambridge, included the words "Je peux vous dire bonjour." Okay, I'm not going to read that. It's all in French, and I'll just botch it up. The author of that sturdy sentiment was then age 9. May was joined in the nursery by 3 brothers, Adolphus in 1868, Francis in 1870, and Alexander in 1874. All were educated at British public schools, 2 at Wellington and the youngest at Eton. The limited influence of the Prince of Francis of Teck on the children reflected his anomalous role. He was regarded in his adopted country as not only foreign, but also, in a sense, stateless. Exclusion from the line of succession in his native Württemberg and his subsequent military career in the service of Austria implanted in Princess May a romantic affection for Vienna and a corresponding distaste for the stiff little courts of Germany. But the prince's repeated efforts to raise his place in the table of royal precedence, to be recognized as, in spite of his father's morganic marriage, it left him frustrated and irritable. In 1871, he persuaded his cousin, the King of Württemberg, to create him Duke of Teck. Again and again, however, Queen Victoria rejected his plea for the British style of royal highness. The Duke of Teck might have borne such setbacks more equally had he found some useful employment other than gardening and rearranging the furniture of his wife's bedroom. During the Egyptian expedition in 1882, he served briefly on the staff of Lord Wolseley, but poor eyesight and a melancholy temperament diminished his chances of military glory. From being gazetted honorary colonel of the post office, volunteers, he was advanced to the rank of colonel in the army. Even that had its disappointments. On the first occasion, he appeared in his new uniform, the Prince of Wales, and he observed with pity, "Francis has got the wrong buttons." Nor did the Queen smile on Disraeli's suggestion that the text should represent her in Ireland as a viceroy. The obstacle to that appointment is likely to have been the character of Princess Mary Adelaide. She was a good-natured, philanthropic, and she was very popular. She lacked the royal virtues of discretion and punctuality. In any case, neither she nor her husband had the means to support the dignity of proconsular life in Dublin Castle. A later suggestion that the Duke should become the ruler of Bulgaria was similarly rejected because of his poverty. That argument did not convince Lord Rosebery, who replied with scorn, "Then put Vanderbilt on the throne of Bulgaria." The final distress of the Duke and Duchess of Teck, which cast a fitful shadow over the Princess May's youth, was largely self-inflicted. Prince Francis had brought nothing more to the marriage than a fine profile and a shapely figure. Princess Mary Adelaide, however, received an annual parliamentary grant of £5,000 and a similar sum each year from her mother. In the age of plentiful servants and low wages, that should have sufficed to live comfortably and to raise a family. The Duchess of Teck, however, had generous instincts of hospitality, and she was proud. Her husband was touchy and feared that any appropriate economy in his establishment would detract from his already uneasy status. Not only were they lavish entertainment at Kensington Palace. In 1870, the Tecks also persuaded the Queen to let them have the additional use of White Lodge, Richmond Park, 10 miles from Kensington. This substantial house belonging to the Crown doubled their household expenses. The Tecks were soon grievously in debt and looked about them not for means of economizing, but for a rescuing hand. The queen, who felt she had done enough for her improvident cousin, she refused to help. The Duchess of Cambridge gave generously within her limited means. Baroness Burdett Coutts added her royal friends to the long list of charitable causes on which she spent her immense baking fortune. She lent them £50,000 with scant hope of ever seeing it again. But the more the Duchess of Teck received, the more she spent. At a time when tradesmen were pressing her for the payment of bills amounting to £20,000, she was invited to open a new church hall in Kensington, to which John Barker, the grocer, had contributed handsomely. And now, she told her amused audience, I must propose a special vote of thanks to Mr. Baker, to whom we all owe so much. When it became apparent that even the most patient and loyal creditors were about to issue writs, the Tecks took the traditional course of those who, to use their daughter's own evocative phrase, were in Short Street. They went abroad. Ends up to be a very key feature in Queen Mary's, where it broadens her horizon. She learns new language. She learns about art and the appreciation of the arts, and she gets her education in that way. Between 1883 and 1885, Princess May shared her parents' temporary exile in Florence, living first at a hotel and later in a villa lent by friends. Whatever the failings of the Tecks as practical economists, they ensured a far better education for their daughter than ever the Wales children received. Hence that's where Mary was a lot more educated than King George. Already well grounded in English, French, and German, she now studied Italian and the history of art. She took lessons in singing and painting. She learned to name the wildflowers of Tuscany. Princess May did not at first care for the cultural riches so fortuitously put at her disposal. We think Florence was rather a dull place, she told her eldest brother. But of course, much of our time is spent in seeing churches. The Florentine houses, she added, seemed so uncomfortably arranged, and they were so dirty, and the people always smell of garlic. She was only 16 at the time, and she soon outgrew her insularity. The Teck family returned to England in the spring of 1885, settling permanently at White Lodge. Princess May continued her education with a new governess, Madame Helene Bricca. A French station displayed all the intellectual curiosity of Dalton, but with a lighter and more penetrating touch. She introduced her pupils to the perspective of history, to the problems of a rapidly expanding industrial society. She instilled habits of concentration and an order in a world of royal dawdlers. From her mother, May acquired a lifelong interest in philanthropy that was not confined to committee work. Dutifully, but without enjoyment, she became accustomed to visiting the poor, the sick, and the distressed in the institutions devoted to their care. No dripping tap or recalcitrant lavatory chains ever escaped those watchful blue eyes. One recurring duty was helping the Duchess collect second-hand clothes that were sold in aid of charities. The Prince of Wales always gave generously from his wardrobe, adding a jocular message that he hoped the Duke of Teck would not take the best clothes for himself this time. Princess Mary could hardly have been expected to spend the rest of her life in ragged school clothes or asylums. Yet when the desire of this attractive, well-educated, and serious-minded girl turned to marriage, she found herself almost an outcast. The reason was neither her parents' insolvency nor her own shyness. Both could have been accommodated in an age of arranged matches. What made her an apparently unsuitable consort for even the smallest reigning houses of Europe was her morganic blood. Her only remaining hope, marriage to a British commoner, seemed equally elusive. Neither her consciously royal mother nor her querulous semi-royal father would have encouraged Princess May her unnecessary descent in rank. Nor would an English or a Scotch suitor or an ancient line relish being treated with condescension. The more recent example was discouraging. In 1871, the Queen's fourth daughter, the Princess Louise, had been married to the Marquess of Lorne. It proved a very unhappy and childless match. The heir to the Dukedom of Argyll and to a score of other splendid titles had to accustom himself to an inferior place in the royal family circle. As James Pope Hennessy wrote in his incomparable biography, Queen Mary, Princess May thus had the worst of both worlds. She was too royal to marry an ordinary Englishman, and not royal enough to marry a royalty, or so in the late 1880s it seemed. Well, that all changed. She was rescued from this dilemma by one person in Europe who possessed both the will and the means, and that was Queen Victoria. She did not share the antipathy of her continental cousins to morganic blood. Sweeping aside their stiff traditional arguments, she determined that Princess May would make an admirable wife for one and then another of her own grandsons. So it came about that a young woman without a fortune, seemingly condemned to spinsterhood by a flawed pedigree, found herself destined to be the queen consort of Britain. In that sense, Princess May was indeed a Cinderella, and Queen Victoria was a godmother of unbounded benevolence. I'm going to pause right there because we're at 37 minutes. Take a break, and then I'm going to read part 2 of the marriage.